you're here. Community engagement session number 2 for our DESAL plan feasibility study. It's an initiative that's led by the County Flood Control District in collaboration with partner agencies throughout the county to see what a regional desalination project for our communities might look like. Community engagement session number 1 was in September. It was virtual, so if you didn't have a chance to tune in or you haven't seen it yet, you can find that on our website, our DESAL plan website. There are QR codes around as well as on the fact sheet if you don't already know how to get to our website. The content for tonight's meeting here was also presented last night in Morro Bay. It's the same material. We just wanted to host it in 2 different locations to hopefully make it easier for people throughout the county to attend one that was closer to them or more convenient. We'll do more introductions in a few slides, but to start, my name is Angela Ford. I'm with County Public Works, and I'm the project engineer working on the study. So, big picture, the purpose of tonight's session, we want to inform you and get your input on our region's water resources. We want to share the progress that we've made on the DESAL study to date. We want to provide information on key trade-offs, constraints, and considerations when it comes to DESAL planning. And we really want to give an opportunity for you to ask questions and engage directly with the project team and provide input as we work towards finalizing the feasibility study. As you can see on the bottom, like community engagement session number 1, the presentation will be recorded for this community engagement session 2. And that will also be available at our website. So if you know anyone who couldn't make it, hopefully you can help get the word out that that's going to be available there. And with that, I'll hand off to Supervisor Paulin to share your words.
Thank you, Angela. Good evening, everyone. So nice to see all of you here. We really appreciate you coming out to share your thoughts and to learn more about this regional desalination facility. For those of you that don't know, the County Board of Supervisors sets budget priorities every year. One of those budget priorities is water resilience. And so we have our Water Resources Division of the Public Works Department really focused on this project in the capacity of the County Flood Control District. And I know that at the workshop last night, there was some confusion as to who the district is. Well, the district is a part of the County of San Luis Obispo, and this effort is being led by the County of San Luis Obispo in concert with all of our partners who are involved in this project. And I think one of the other important things to clarify is that we are at a stage where we are simply evaluating the feasibility of ocean desalination at a number of sites. We're not at a decision point. We're not making decisions as to which site is the most feasible. We're going through a deliberate process with a consultant who's using a number of criteria to analyze a number of sites. Ultimately, the Board of Supervisors will have a discussion as to what the next steps are. But it is really important to understand that we want your engagement, we want your feedback. We want to know that the community is comfortable with the idea and have the community's voice represented in this process. So again, thank you all for being here. I guess one other final comment is just about regionalization. We've seen, I used to serve on the Rio Grande City Council where we worked on the Central Coast Blue recycled water projects. I know we have representatives from the City of River Beach, City of Rio Grande here today, probably the Oceana Community Services District. Regionalism is tough. We see that costs go up, and oftentimes we have to raise rates in order to pay for those costs or projects. And so this isn't an easy idea to work regionally on something we absolutely need. But if we're not looking out 20 years, 30 years into the future and trying to solve that problem now, I think we're going to find ourselves in a pickle. And so it does start now. And I want to just lift up and recognize the good work of our staff and our consultants to help us lead this project forward as a region. And again, thank all the community partners and the public who are here today to participate. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, welcome and thank you so much for coming. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate all of you out of your busy schedules to be with us tonight. I am going to give you a quick lay of the land on how we're gonna spend our time together tonight. So we have about 2 hours scheduled. Our project team, most of us are able to stick around a bit after, so if there's more comments and questions we didn't get to, we'll be able to stick around a bit longer if you'd like to with us. But for our 2 hours, we planned, we're gonna start with these quick introductory remarks. And then after that, we want to make sure everyone has the same foundational information. So we're going to start the first half of today with presentations. So we'll have a bit on the legacy of water throughout the region and how we think about water planning in the big picture. And then after that, then we'll dig into desalination and the feasibility study here locally, to give you some grounding in what we're looking at so far and what the team has been finding. At that point, we'll pause for a brief Q&A, answer some of the more foundational questions that may be in people's minds. And for that, we'll ask that you're writing down your questions throughout. That way, don't be pausing throughout the presentation. Okay, Carolyn's here. Is that it? Okay. Great. So you'll be able to write down your questions throughout. Maybe you don't know what a term is, maybe you have bigger questions about how the study was conducted. Just write down each question you have. We're happy to give you more cards and then pass them into Carolyn and Anthony. You can hold it up and they'll come around and grab them, and we'll be trying to sort them so that we can get to as many questions as we can in that brief period. Then the second half of today is really digging into more details with all of you. And so what we wanted to do was give you the opportunity to talk with each of the expert teams and engage with the consultants around different topics. So we'll explain that later, but there's 3 different stations and you'll have the chance to go spend about 10 minutes or so at each station, ask more questions, provide comments, and they'll be capturing them along the way. That's important. All of tonight, we're capturing things that are coming up, and as Supervisor Paulding mentioned, that's a big part of the study, is making sure we're hearing what's on the minds of the community. And then at the end, we'll do some closing remarks. We'll have each station lead report out on some of the themes they heard, and then we'll tell you about next steps. The final piece will be, you feel like your question wasn't answered, or you had comments that you felt like didn't get heard in the way you hoped they would, we'll stick around. We'll do more of an open mic. So that final piece will be, for those who want to stick around, I'll walk the mic around. We can have more of a conversation and try to answer what we can. I have a reminder over here on how you can give input. The beginning is written questions on index cards. Then we'll do our small station rotations and get into more intimate conversations. Quieter, hopefully everyone can hear. And then we'll do that open forum at the end. Final comment, some of you might like to think and process and then think on your comments later. You can also submit comments through the county's website. As Angela mentioned, there's QR codes around the room and it's on the fact sheet we have. So I'm being really clear on that because last night that was a big topic of conversation. How are you getting input throughout the meeting? Introductions. I'm Carolyn Bird. I'm part of the consultant team. I live here locally and I'm helping with the outreach. Our 2 main presenters are Courtney Howard with the county and Lydia Holmes with Furlough, the lead consultant team. And our technical team, we have Angela Ford, we met Joey Style, both with the county, and we also have Don Yadali and Nick Teague in the back, also with County Public Works. Everyone's here listening and taking in your input. And then for our experts around the room that you'll meet at the stations, we have Anthony Simo, Carolyn Rose, and then Jim Hamill's not here tonight, but we'll have other folks that can help at the stations. And Angela mentioned, well, this is a district-led study, and that's an important note. There are also communities and agencies who've expressed an interest in exploring desalination. So we have 3 volunteers who are showing up as staff of those agencies to listen in, hear what's on your mind, and then if it makes sense, they can also help give a community perspective when you're talking at those stations. So we have Greg Ray with City of Grover Beach, somewhere with that. We have Shane Taylor, City of Rio Grande, who you met, coming in the door, and Randy Enzo, also at the welcome table from the CSD. So tonight, ground rules, it's a big group, so we like to try to start on the same page. We're here because we want to hear from you. We want you to feel like you're getting the information you'd like to know about DESAL at this early stage. And so please participate throughout. We've got those 3 different ways of participating throughout the evening, and we hope you'll be jumping in on those opportunities. Be respectful, both of the team around the room. We are here to listen and be with you in the conversation. And be respectful of each other. Share the airtime here at the stations. Give everyone a chance to ask their questions or make their comments. And we'll ask that you stay on topic if you can. When you're around the room, the stations, they might direct you to save a comment for another station. You're welcome to share it there if you'd rather. And overall, keep an open mind, as Supervisor Paulding and Angela mentioned, it's a long process. It's part of the big picture of talking about water. So just have an open mind. It's all about having a conversation together. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Courtney.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Courtney Howard. Thanks for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. Just thought I'd talk a little bit more about the county and its role and history of water planning, especially from a regional perspective. So really our role has been to monitor conditions countywide. And then if those conditions aren't where we want them to be, if our water supplies are projected to not meet our demands going forward, then we start planning, we look at options and being ready to respond to the changes when they do happen. And then we collaborate with others to implement projects for water supply. And so we'll go through a few examples of that. So some of the changing conditions that we look for. This is an example of measuring our groundwater levels. So we started that back in the 50s and 60s. We had volunteers, property owners allow us to come out to their wells and measure them twice a year so that we could keep a pulse on conditions. And then when we see these declining trends over time, that's what kind of triggers everyone to get together and start looking at what are solutions that we can look at. Another way to look at it is when we have sustained declines, it's reflected in the change in groundwater over time. So that's more of a quantity-based metric when we see that the supplies aren't keeping up with demands over time. The other metric we're looking for is more along the lines of resiliency. So that's when you're talking about drought cycles, and we're looking at the length of those drought cycles and to what extent our supplies are enough to cover us all the way through. And so we had some significant periods where we saw reservoirs pretty low, and that also impacts our groundwater basins and makes it hard to recover enough rainfall. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of both quantity over time available and resiliency through these drought periods. And so in response to some of that groundwater level decline and those projections of demands exceeding supplies over time, some of the reservoirs got built, starting way back in the 40s with Santa Margarita Lake, which is formed by Salinas Dam. It's actually built by the War Department during the war, but then the war ended. And then it was with all the folks that had come to San Luis Obispo, they needed the water supply. So they kept that water supply. And then moving Rock Reservoir was also built to help the city again in Cal Poly and CMC and Cayugas. And then down in South County, you're familiar with Lopez Lake, and then that was built to help mitigate impacts from only having groundwater at that time. Then we joined the state water system when Santa Barbara County also was ready to go. We have 11 communities that took state water at that time and rely on it today. Then we built the pipeline from Lake Nacimiento for the communities in the North County and the city of San Luis Obispo. So several projects have come in over time, and then since that time, and in the last couple of decades, the shift in focus has been to water use efficiency. So that's when we saw a lot of technology advancing in terms of recycled water use and water use efficiency, irrigation efficiency. A lot of individual practices changed, and the way we use water changed to try to make our water supplies go further, and that definitely needs to continue. The other key point is that these projects take a lot of time. These, here's some examples. State Water and the Nacimiento Water Project were both planned and agreed to in the 50s and 60s, but it wasn't until the 90s and 2000s that the communities said, okay, we're ready. Let's pay for this and get our water to our communities. And then it became operational shortly after that. So that's one example from a water supply perspective, but also for recycled water, it can take a long time, and so are multiple examples of that process. So just something to keep in mind, when we're looking at projects to increase our water supply. So where we're today, very, very similar situation to where we've always been. Water is vital for everybody, and everybody has a different view and relationship with water that needs to be taken into account as we're looking at shared resources. We've got a lot of changing needs and mandates. We have the new groundwater management law, we have environmental flow needs. We're looking at changing conditions with the weather patterns. And we've got to balance all of these things in looking forward to the future. You know, how much risk are we willing to take on? How much cutbacks or other kinds of, demand management type strategies are we willing to do versus the cost of creating new water supplies or other improvements. And so a lot of that is going on in parallel, all of the above going on right now. So again, looking at, the changing conditions, the projections for things getting drier, what does that mean for our the availability of the resources we have. So it's definitely something we're looking at, and we want to be ready should those projections come to fruition and start changing the way our existing water resources have historically sustained us. And we want an all of the above approach in terms of continuing with water use efficiency and recycled water and optimizing the water supplies we do have available, in addition to looking at new water supplies like ocean desalination. So all of those efforts are kind of going on in parallel. And they are going on in parallel. And then of course, we always see the headlines during our drought cycles. We've had 2 significant ones in recent decades. And all of our current water supplies are dependent on that rainfall to replenish and refill. And so that's another reason why looking at DESAL is part of the overall water portfolio, being right next to the coast, something to start looking at, or continue looking at. And so again, just looking at all of those things and looking at a portfolio approach for our county and individual communities, and to what extent are we looking at regional planning for all of our needs. And it's a long process. So that's kind of continuing that legacy, I guess, of planning and getting ready for the future when communities are ready to move forward. So we were able to learn from those past projects to come up with a concept phasing and a concept schedule for what a DESAL project might look like. Right now, we're in phase 2. The first phase was to just ask the water agencies whether they wanted to look at it with us. Because ultimately, they would be a big part because of all the infrastructure and the communities that they serve, big part of whether or not to move forward once we have some more information. So we're in the first part of the second phase, which is looking at the whole coastline and coming up with a way to narrow it down using the state's guidance, which our consultant team will talk about next. And then once we're done with this study, like Supervisor Carling mentioned, we'll be at a first decision point, whether or not to move forward with any additional work for any of those shortlisted alternatives to understand them better and answer any additional questions that we weren't able to answer. For example, how far out would intakes have to go to not impact the fresh groundwater, and where exactly could it be sited? Some of those, you got to look at the geology. So that second phase, part of this phase would likely involve more detailed studies that interested parties may or may not want to go forward. So just kind of an overall picture of a little more detail of the whole projected timeline. And there's a lot of decision points along the way. One, just as a local, agencies, whether to move forward with more planning, but then even further along, there's regulatory agencies, there's other local, state regulating agencies. There's a long process and a lot of decision points along the way. So with that, just wanted to mention again that we're grateful to have all the water agencies willing to talk with us about this and explore it and create scenarios for us to study and understand better what it would look like potentially. So with that, I'm going to let Lydia go over the detail.
I'm going to go home. I'll just pause to mention that again, the cards, if anyone wants to pass cards over, let people, the new cards or we will be pausing when I'm done with my presentation to take some of your questions. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the feasibility study that we're doing. I want to start with the question of what is seawater or ocean desalination? And really, this is about transforming ocean water into drinkable water. And that's through treatment that's what's typically used is reverse osmosis, or RO, is what we call it. And so the graphic on this slide is from the city of Santa Barbara's website. The city of Santa Barbara has an ocean desal plant. So this is an example of a local facility not too far away that is doing this. So I'm going to just walk you through the graphic a little bit so people can understand what are the components of the desalination process. So it starts with,
TV, we'll work on it.
we'll work on the TV, okay. All right, well, I'll wave my hands. See if I can get it to work that way. Okay, so you start with an intake that is in the ocean. It pulls the water in, it goes into pre-treatment and then the reverse osmosis. The treated water goes out, gets stabilized and goes out into the homes for drinking. There is a waste product called brine. It's salty water, basically. You're eliminating the salt with the treatment. That goes back out to an outfall. So these are the major components that you'll hear us talking about throughout these slides. Intake and outfall are pretty important pieces, and then there's the treatment. Okay, so that's just to give you, whoops, I went the wrong way. Okay, also I wanted to address that there are a lot of interest right now on alternative technologies that are really being designed to try to mitigate impacts that the system that I just walked you through, a more conventional desalination system has. So these are looking at ways to mitigate high energy use or marine impacts. And so there's a lot of exciting research going on to a lot of different types of technologies, whether it's using wave energy to drive this, or using the depth of seawater to push water through the membranes. They all use reverse osmosis, so it is the same process. It's just using a different power source, really. None of these are currently permitted in California, and none of them are full scale in operation. So while it's definitely good to keep an eye on the ball for the future, and I think there's a lot of work going on these alternative technologies, we're not really able to fully evaluate the feasibility of them in this study. So, but we do recognize that there's something that you should keep an eye on for the future. Okay. So the state of California's position on ocean desal is laid out in the California Water Plan and the California Water Supply Strategy. It's identified as an important source of potable water for the future, and there is a goal to increase desalination by 84,000 acre feet a year by 2040. The ocean plan, which is shown on the right, lays out requirements for protection of marine ecosystem. And there are a number of things called preferred technologies that are laid out. I'll refer to those in this presentation too. They're all designed to be protective of the marine life that are in the ocean. And I just want to state that for people who don't deal with the state of California regulatory on a regular basis, you may not know this, but the state of California is very protective. There's higher degrees of regulation in California than just about any other state. So they do a good job of trying to think about what all the impacts are and require that everyone meets a very high bar. Okay, so want to just talk about the benefits and limitations of desalination. We've touched on a few of them already. The benefits are that it provides a local, high quality drinking water. It's drought resilient, largely because it's not tied to rainfall, hydrologic cycles. We don't need to have surface water flows or wastewater flows. We're pulling from the big reservoir of water that is our oceans.
And so therefore it can provide safeguard against unpredictable water shortages. Some of the limitations and concerns is that it's expensive to construct and operate. We're not trying to hide from that. This is an expensive approach to new alternative water supplies. I, as a water planner, will say there are no cheap water sources left in California. So this is just one of the not cheap options that's out there. It's difficult to permit, and that is due to environmental impacts mitigation, and that goes back to what I was saying, that the state of California takes this very seriously. So they do have a high bar that you have to cross before they will give you a permit for this. And these systems are not super flexible to turn off and run only occasionally, like run only once every 5 years during a drought. You do need to be running them on a more regular basis. Otherwise, you're basically ruining your membranes. Okay. So we've gone through a screening process to narrow the options down to some viable project options that we're presenting to you today. That started with looking at identifying potential sites. We did site screening, came up with 12 concept alternatives, and then did a rough screening to 5 concept alternatives that we're sharing with you today. And we're developing costs on those 5 alternatives. So the 5 alternatives that sites that we're looking at for further evaluation are shown on this map. And in case you can't read that small writing, I'll read it to you. Starting north to south, we have the Cambria area, Estero Marine Terminal or Cayucas area, Morro Bay area, South Slow County or the Water Treatment Plant area, and then the Pomo Mesa Refinery. These sites represent geographic areas, they're not exact locations. We removed any sites that had unsuitable hydrogeology, for example, with Diablo Canyon. And to explain this a little bit further, I'm going to just pull up this little graphic here. So I mentioned intakes, that's to hold the water into the system. Most people think of open intakes where the impacts are maybe catching fish and plankton and all these things on screens. So those really are not permittable in the state of California anymore. So what we're looking at is a subsurface intake, which means that it's like a well. You're pulling the water through the soil. So this needs to be soil that water can go through. So think sandy soil. So the little map over here shows the geology of the coastline, and what we were looking for was sandy soils. If it's rocky, it's not going to be suitable for this kind of intake. Okay, so and then outfalls is another thing that's one of these preferred technologies that I mentioned that the state requires. They require the subsurface intake. They want you to use existing outfalls wherever possible. And so we looked at where are existing outfalls, which last time we got this question again, what is an outfall? It's a pipeline out into the ocean to send out waste products to the ocean. And however, we do have some options that need a new outfall. Okay, so we went through a rough screening process where looking more on the land side, we were trying to assess, are there sites where we could actually site a treatment facility as well? So we built a layer using geographic information systems, GIS, where we looked at things like, what are the biological habitats in the region? Is this in a floodplain? Are there conservation easements? Is it a protected area? So we built all those layers. The map to the right that shows an example of this, where they were trying to see, are there sites, and how big are those sites that are outside of all those protected areas that we don't want to site something at. So again, feasibility analysis, do we even have sites that are potentially available for these locations? Okay, we now put all these elements together and start developing alternatives. So for our purposes, an alternative is a site for an ocean intake, outfall, and treatment plant. We need to define what the size of the facility is going to be. That's really set by the size of the outfall. If we're using an existing outfall, it has a certain amount of capacity of water that you can send out. So that sets the size. And then we say, okay, and who are the users who want this water? and how much do they need to use. So the end users gets paired up for the alternative. And then finally, after all that, we say, how do we get the water to those end users through pipeline conveyance infrastructure needs? So all those pieces together make alternatives. And so this table is a lot to look at all at once. I want to show you, I'm going to walk through each one of the alternatives, but we want to just start by saying, here's the overview of the 5 alternatives. I mentioned already the locations, which is shown in the first column. The second column shows the partners served. Next column, third one over, shows the capacity range of this alternative. And then the final column shows, are we using an existing outfall or a new outfall? Whose outfall is it that we're using? And then what's the total amount of piping that we need? So this is a little summary table, and we'll put it up while we're doing Q&A too, if people want to be able to refer back to certain alternatives. But I'll walk you through each one of these. So starting with alternative A, and these are, I'm presenting them north to south. They are not like in any prioritized order. So, okay, so starting on the north end, we've got the Cambria area, local deliveries. We have between 330 and 580 acre feet a year that can be served by this facility. The users are Cambria and San Simeon. This is a region of the county that has a very tenuous water supply. Reliant on very small local groundwater basins that do have trouble in drought years and even in the fall in moderately dry years. They do have a tiny outfall at San Simeon. It's not big enough for a project like this, and it's also not really suitable. It doesn't go out far enough. So the other thing with this alternative that we want to point out is that this is an area that has sensitive habitat. That dashed line that you see is showing a marine conservation area. So we really did our best to try to cite anything outside of that. Okay? Again, we want something to be permittable. So that does lead to longer amount of pipelines. So you see the colored lines on the graphic here, and since I can't use my pointer, I'll do this again. But the intake and outfall we're locating outside of the marine protection area, but that does lead to longer pipelines to be able to get the water back to the end users. Okay, so moving on to alternative B. This is at the Cayucas Estro Marine Terminal. This size is between 930 and 1,000, a little over 1,000 acre feet larger. You can see larger than the last one. That size is really based on that Estro Marine Terminal outfall capacity, how much water, extra water we think could go in there. The potential users are again Cambria and San Simeon, longer pipeline up there from the previous location, and then also Los Osos. There might be a bit left over that could be used for exchange with some South County users through state water project exchanges through Morro Bay. But where we have it laid out right now, we have approximately 32 miles for this alternative. Okay, alternative C is Morro Bay area. This one is larger still. It's almost 6,000 acre feet to almost 8,000 acre feet. Again, this is because they have a much larger outfall. So that's the capacity of the outfall that we can use. Potential users, then we can expand because we have a larger capacity, we can get to more end users with that. So we're starting with Los Osos, we're taking a pipeline inland, that you see the light blue that goes inland, that goes to the city of SLO, Cal Poly, we're tying into South County, Lopez users, doing exchanges for Templeton, we can potentially serve some of the groundwater agencies that are seeing declining groundwater. And we could take a pipeline all the way up to Cambria and San Simeon again, and potentially do some exchanges with Santa Barbara County through the state water project line. So because we're serving a lot more users that are a lot more spread out, again, the pipeline length goes up, so we're at 46 miles. Okay, alternative D, this is the South County area. which maybe most of you are most interested in these last two, as we move to the south here. This is between 5,000 and almost 7,000 acre feet a year can be served again based on the capacity of the outfall. The potential users are all of the Lopez users in South County, as well as the Pomo, but we also are showing taking a pipeline up into the city of SLO to serve Capoli and SLO, and also be able to tie in Los Osos. And again, I mentioned the Pomo, and we can also do again some potential exchanges for using cemento or state water. This one has approximately 31 miles of pipeline. So a little more, a little less pipeline for this one because there's a lot of users right in this area. And then our last alternative is at the Napomo Mesa Refinery. Cite the number of names, it's also the Chevron Refinery and the Santa Maria Refinery, so whatever you want to call it, we're calling it Napomo Mesa. Smaller capacity that we can serve here based on the outfall, so between 18 and 1,900 feet a year. The users that we can serve then with that volume are the South County Lopez users in Napomo. And again, an option to take some water to Santa Barbara County with exchanges with state water. We would be using that existing refinery outfall that is currently been decommissioned right now. This site is decommissioned and available for redevelopment. And this is 21 miles of total pipeline. So I just wanted to touch briefly on kind of switching gears before we get to Q&A, that we've had a number of engagement activities where we're working in the center with the DESAL plan partners. We've had conversations with regulatory and permitting agencies, and then we're out here now meeting with interested community members. And we'll talk a little bit about this and what is coming up in the future toward the end. So we're going to change the way again. So coming back to the rough screen alternatives, and then because we're going to start some Q&A for clarifying questions. So if you've written anything on your cards, please turn them in and we'll start taking some questions. And I'm going to put this back up and see where we'll look at what those alternatives are.
Thanks, everyone. So keep writing down thoughts you're having, and we'll get to as many of these as we can. With our first question, and typically what I've been doing is having Lydia and Courtney join me up here. We might tag others in if needed. So we have a question. Does our area show a need for DESAL plants? And does the poor use of a Kindred DESAL plant have any influence on the plant?
For second question, try to channel last night's answer for that question. For Cambria, I believe it's actually a brackish water system versus more of a subsurface intakes that we're talking about here. But definitely dealing with disposal of the brine is one of the key parts of looking at the feasibility for this project. And why we're looking at it is staying outfalls and making sure we're trying to evaluate against the state guidance for disposing of brine. You know, this big problem. The first part. I'd say current drivers for interest in water supply is groundwater declines that we've seen. And then also some of the more vulnerable communities that Lydia touched on. And I think some of the, the planning that we're doing for use of our existing reservoirs and projections on whether or not the next drought cycles will be too long for our reservoirs to handle. Just driving some of that, more of that resiliency.
Always prior to the ocean of what kind of waste.
Should we repeat the question, please? Repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question is about the outfalls of the waste product to the ocean, what kind of waste is it? So really what the membrane, the reverse osmosis process is doing is concentrating. So it's pushing the water through a membrane where it's really the water molecules go through and everything else stays behind. That's a simplification of it, but it's very small size, so things much larger than a water molecule can't get through. So what it leaves behind is salt. So this ends up being a salty product, which is why it's called brine, that needs to be discharged back to the ocean. I can go back onto that one. How far offshore is water drawn, which we have spoken to, and then what do you tell us about that non-water solution? So how far offshore is water drawn? That's really going to vary on each site. So following this high-level feasibility study, should any group want to take it further, you would need to do more detailed investigation. And that would include geologists and hydrogeologists, and you'd be doing a lot of site-specific investigations to look at where is the freshwater, saltwater interface out in the groundwater, basically, the soils that are offshore. At what point is it turning completely salty? And I'm seeing some puzzling questions.
Is it a
I will.
mile or 10 miles?
I don't know at this point, and it really depends on where you're at. So if you are in a saltwater intruded basin, that's under our feet. If you're in a place where there's a lot of fresh water in your groundwater basin, that freshwater interface might be a mile offshore. So it really depends on what's happening in your groundwater basin. I can't give you the number, sorry.
Is DESAL the top economic solution?
So, as I said, DESAL is not a cheap water solution for sure. It's one of many different things that you can consider. Building new reservoirs is not cheap and has environmental impacts as well. Building recycled water isn't cheap and has impacts as well. So I wouldn't say it's the top economic solution. I think it's one of many solutions, and each of them has pros and cons, both economically, environmentally, and socially. So.
Okay. A bit more to do with overall supply. So for one, for each alternative, and this may be something you want to get into at station, so feel free to flag me. But for each alternative, what's the expected projection as a percentage of usage in supply areas? So the overall supply, okay, what is recycled water? How does that fit in? So when you're thinking big picture water supply.
Recycled water?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, when I think about recycled water, one of the other projects we're working on is our countywide master water report, and it's gonna be able to generate a report that reports out how we're doing countywide in reusing our wastewater. And so when you go from everything to our septic systems that recharge the basin, to discharge inland, to our creek systems that percolate down, to triple pipes in San Luis Obispo, and we've got golf courses being irrigated, we're actually doing a pretty good job. There's a few places to go yet, and that's, continuing to look at that will be a part of our planning, in addition to continuing to meet both the states and our own goals for water use efficiency. And there's, as what came up last night, various technologies that we can do as individuals, whether it's gray water systems on our own, for our own homes, or atmospheric harvesting came up, and so all of the above, but definitely what can we do as individuals and what can we do collectively to make sure we're resilient going forward. So this question was, for each alternative, what is the expected production as a percentage of usage in supplied areas? So I'm going to kind of take it a step higher of how do we come up with the alternatives. And so we were really trying to create a bookend of alternatives, small to large, that, you know, different geographic locations. We started with looking at each of the partner agencies' water supplies and asked them to identify for us, what does your future water supply look like? Do you anticipate shortages? Are those shortages in drought conditions only? Are they all the time? You know, is your growth outpacing your water supply? And then ask them, if there was a DESAL project to move forward, how much would you want? So that's kind of the baseline that we started with. And then we played around with some of our scenarios of, okay, if we had a DESAL facility, how else might we want to use this? So I think an important one to consider for South County is that the Lake Lopez, maybe Courtney should talk about this, she's much better at it than I am, but there's some potential for needing to leave more water in for environmental flows. So we said, well, what if there was a 25% cutback? And how would we serve that? So that may give some percentage, but otherwise there is no set percentage. Everyone kind of weighed in on what their needs were, and that really depends on the partner.
Not easy for all of us, but easy for what is Sigma?
Previous life. Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Back in 2015, the state created or passed the first groundwater management law that kind of asked all the agencies overlying those basins to get together and look at, you know, the state had already identified high, medium priority basins and said, okay, get together and figure out how you're going to stabilize your groundwater bodies. And so those agencies formed cooperative agreements to develop their plans, and now they're implementing those plans. And they're looking also at what kind of demand management or conservation type strategies could they implement to stabilize levels, and what kind of water supply projects could they do. And so that's why they're also being thought about as we're thinking about who might need or want to participate in such a project.
Great question. We've got about 5 more minutes for this portion, just to get some big picture questions answered. I did want to note, I think I'm capturing this remark right, that the science says oceans will rise substantially, DESAL plants can use the water sooner, the sooner the better, so. Noting that. And then we've got a number of more specific questions, so I'm gonna probably point these towards, Lydia and hand off as needed. So, and I'm gonna hand you the card, but there's one question on what are the energy requirements for DESAL versus conventional treatment? What does feasibility mean in this context? And then kind of what are other sources versus DESAL?
Well, we kind of talked already about what some of the other sources are, and I think we've been completely honest about this, that DESAL is not a low energy using alternative. So I think when you look at any new water supply option, you have to think not just about the treatment energy, but also the amount of energy it takes to move water. So, for example, moving water from Northern California to Southern California, where most of state water goes, represents a huge energy use. Maybe you guys aren't taking quite as much of that energy pie because you're only, you know, halfway down, you're not all the way down to San Diego or whatever. But, you know, so you got to think about that there's also energy embedded in other infrastructure alternatives as well. So, so yes, high energy requirement. I don't have a specific number to give you at this moment, but yeah, that will be part of this study. Feasibility in the context of this study is really, we're looking at what is implementable. And that's sort of what I talked about, is that we're trying to work through what are the requirements that the state would hold you to. That's why we're not considering open intakes, for example. We have to do subsurface. That's why we're looking at whenever possible, using existing outfalls, because that's what the state would hold you to. So I would say that's our bar. There. And then what was last, which one was the last one was the intake to outfall distance? I guess I would. Yeah, sorry, there was a question on distance from intake to outfall. For all these options, nothing is decided yet, right? These are just concepts. Yes, you wouldn't want to have them right next to each other because there would be some influence going on. So I'm not sure what distance you would need to have them not influence each other, but we don't have them decided right next to each other. So.
One more. Try to get to all of these before you head out in the station. So a few of the options include distribution through the state water project. That is great for communities using that. Any considerations for more communities on this? I mean, for communities not to have state water project.
Yeah, I think we came up with some alternatives in order to evaluate them and do some costing so we can have some more information for decision making. But I'm thinking the next phase, should we want to go forward, then we look at more detail. What is the existing infrastructure we can utilize in any of these alternatives, and what new infrastructure, and then have more community outreach about interest in being included. So a lot of these alternatives would be refined, should we go to their interest in going to the next phase. So another example of one of those more detailed evaluations, should any of those alternatives move forward.
Questions go to other examples of DESAL. I'll do two. One of the questions is about how much would this cost, and I'll say that's the next part of the study, so I'll answer that one. But the other question is, if we know how much the Santa Barbara DESAL plant costs.
I don't have that on top of my
Okay.
head, sorry.
So don't have that, but it's, we'll note that and be able to look that up.
I know we've been trying to find apples to apples. It's a little challenging because every DESAL plant is kind of a different story. Like Carlsbad had the open intakes, and Santa Barbara County had held on to their permits. And so they didn't have to do certain things because their permit was open. And then others just aren't far enough along for us to know the true costs. So, but we are, as a next step in the study, now we have 5. They're going to be working on some conceptual cost estimates, so that we will have that in the report and be able to consider that.
You have a question here. Israel has DESAL plans. Are we considering their technique?
So yeah, a lot of people point to Israel, and that's absolutely true. In the Middle East, DESAL is a very widely accepted process. And in Australia as well, they have a lot of DESAL. They do not have the same kinds of regulations as California. They are open intakes. So it's more difficult to implement here, safer to marine life to implement there.
All right, and I ask one more broad question, and then there's a very specific on an alternative. So, is there a requirement that we implement water recycling or groundwater recharge before we can do DESAL?
Yes, the state's guidance includes that you need to optimize your existing water supplies and strategies before you look at DESAL. So we really are serious about looking at all of the above, especially with this being a long-term project. We've got a lot of near-term and mid-term efforts going on to look at better ways to use state water, better ways to use non-standard water, and of course, our continuing efforts to use water more efficiently on an individual basis.
Two more questions for y'all. So that alternative D, so it shows an intake lines going to the city of Slow. What's going on? We can speak to city of Slow.
Yeah, so for alternative D, and yeah, you can go back if you want, try to find it. So the question was about intake. So the intake and outfall are located down here near the existing wastewater outfall. And then pipelines are taken to a point in the, we're basically using Lopez pipeline
because it's existing infrastructure. So we're taking a pipeline to a junction where all of the Lopez users can pull off of it. So it would supplement the Lopez line. But we're also taking a pipeline all the way up into the city of San Luis Obispo. There's a potential tie-in to go out to Los Osos. And San Luis Obispo is kind of at a nice junction of where there's a lot of different water supplies. So they have the potential to also do some exchanges with, using the Nacimiento pipeline. They can let Templeton have some of Slow's Nasi water in exchange. So there's opportunities for exchanges.
I don't know.
Is that an answer to the
Kind of
question?
The arching, so maybe if you're just describing what's happening.
Yeah, you want to take that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So the arching pipelines are essentially, I don't know if this is a slang term, but water wheeling, where you pretty much move water from one point to another using existing infrastructure. So, for example, we don't want to have a transmission main going right through the city of San Luis Obispo. We would give San Luis Obispo water on this side and take water in the distribution system on the other side to convey to Los Osos. So it really just eliminates a nice section of infrastructure by wheeling the water through the city's distribution system. That's all those arrows mean.
All right, we have one last question and then we're gonna describe the next station, rotation for y'all. Okay, I hope I get this right and Travis can tell me if I don't. South County Sewer is under California Commission mandate to plan for the probable relocation of the entire operation by 2047. All municipal water needs to be treated for human quality. State requires all water to be recycled before it will fund desalination. When will county start collaborative planning for relocation of the South Slow CSD, the treatment facility? Full project estimated to be 15 to 17 years from start to finish, which means starting by 2030. So kind of big picture is water.
And I think in my mind, this is just my own personal thought on that is another example of what would be looked at further should that particular alternative be of interest to partners. And so, you know, could that be a collaborative effort what I'm trying to say, if they have to move it anyway, is there an opportunity for a joint project that could achieve both objectives? You know, I could see that being discussed sometime in the future. I'm not saying they're doing that right now, just a concept level of what could potentially be discussed during a next phase, or should any of these alternatives go forward. A lot of those, you know, discussions would have to be had and ideas will probably come out on the table and try to be thought through, you know, to try to make the most effective decision for, you know, any given need. So we call that integrated regional water management. We're big fans of in terms of, you know, trying to think about integrated strategies for water resiliency.
Well, thank you everyone for submitting your questions along the way and for getting us thinking what's on your mind and where we're headed next. So next, what we want to do is, for those of you who might prefer a conversation and be able to have smaller conversations, ask whatever's on your mind, what we didn't get to, or to give comments. We're going to be doing a breakout station rotation. So this is those smaller conversations I mentioned earlier. What we're going to do, I'm going to divide you into 3 groups. And I've kind of been counting as we've been sitting here. I think these 2 rows straight across is about 10. So you'll all be one group together. I'm going to put you at station 1 in the corner. But let us describe them first. Then back here, this corner, you'll all be together at station 2. Right, that's station 3. And then back here in the other corner, you'll all be at station 2. What we're going to do at the station, and Olivia's going to walk around and show you kind of what each topic area is. We'll give a brief intro when you get there. The expert staff from partner agencies and the county staff are there to help give you a little bit of overview. What are you talking about there? There's informational boards you can look at, you can dig into and ask questions, or just start asking what's on your mind. And that's really what these are intended for. So we'll do about 10 minutes at each station, and you'll see the big sticky notes. Someone at your station, one of those partners, will be taking notes throughout. And, so make sure they're capturing your thoughts along the way. And those will be reflected in our summary coming out of the sessions. I'm trying to make sure I've covered all my pieces. Yes, so you'll see, you should have about 2 or 3 folks at your station there to help answer questions. And if we can't answer your question, we'll take those back and that'll just be part of more of the things that you look into either now or future phases. So Lydia's gonna walk you around and explain what each station is and answer questions for you.
Okay, so we have boards at each of the stations. I'm gonna kind of pull them up and then also walk to them so you know which area. So the first station over here, number 1, is about regional fit and reliability. Why should we find a new supply? So at a very high level, what we're talking about on this board is what's the risk and resiliency of the existing supplies. So we have pictures of some of the different supplies that are in the county and what some of those issues that each of those supplies have that can contribute to wanting to have some additional supply reliability. Okay, so that is board number 1. So number 2, which is back to this corner, and I'll walk up here, and there's another board right here that's talking about closing the gap of regional infrastructure. It's talking about how we came up with alternative development. We've got a map that shows all of the infrastructure, the pipelines that would be required for the different alternatives and color coded. Ask Anthony, who's the one who put them all together. He knows what's left there. It talks a little bit about our screening process of how we came up with those sites, GIS layers that I talked about. Okay, and then the third board is about permits in the Pacific, navigating the coastal zone. Big scary coastal commission that has to issue permits for anything on the coast, and a lot of the things we alluded to already of what's required for implementing a project like this. I'm lucky enough to have Carolyn here with me from DUDEC, and she used to work at the Coastal Commission, so she has a unique perspective on this question. So what we're talking about here are some 5 different elements, which we've already talked about in this presentation quite a bit, but the subsurface intake, the geology, how do we avoid protected areas, sensitive habitats, how do we utilize existing ocean outfalls, and then what's the process for getting a permittable alternative. So those are the 3 stations, so I'll move on with breaking it up.